Okay, so you know how everyone's always talking about the gut-brain connection? Like that whole thing when your stomach's in knots and suddenly you're anxious or the other way around?
Yeah.
Like it's almost common sense now, right? But here's the thing.
Right.
It's just like the tip of the iceberg, really. Your gut microbiota, that massive community of microbes that live inside you, they're actually constantly communicating with pretty much every other part of your body.
Got it. Forget just the brain. We're going way beyond that today.
Oh, wait.
We're diving deep, deep, deep into the cutting edge of understanding here.
Yeah.
We're exploring brand new connections between your gut and all these surprising systems, from your skin all the way down to your bones and your heart.
Oh, yeah. And based on like some truly fascinating research, and the sheer number of connections is mind blowing, right? I mean, like
hmm
our source material here, it highlights 9 distinct axes. We're talking about how your gut impacts your skin health, muscle growth, lung function, fat storage, bone density, your kidneys, your heart, even those pesky, like persistent skin problems that just won't quit.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Our mission today is to really break these connections down for you, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
to go beyond just knowing they exist and really dive into the how. How do they work at a biological level?
Yeah.
And then more importantly, how can you actually use this knowledge to take control of your health?
Right.
And
Exactly.
maybe even prevent diseases down the line.
Yeah. You might already be like pretty familiar with the gut brain thing, but like get ready to have your mind blown by all these other lines of communication that are like silently happening inside you right now. Okay, let's start with like, I guess, the most visible connection. Our skin, we see it every single day. So what's the gut's role in all that?
Well, your skin, it's your largest organ. And, just like your gut, it's teeming with billions and billions of bacteria. And what's really fascinating is that we found a clear link between the balance of your gut microbiota and all kinds of skin issues,
All right, no.
like psoriasis,
Hmm.
acne, even those, unwelcome signs of aging like wrinkles.
Ugh, yes. Okay, so like, how does this whole internal world actually affect what we see on the surface?
It really comes down to what your gut microbes are making, right? They're busy fermenting fiber and other compounds.
Yeah.
And in this process, they create these things called short-chain fatty acids, or SCFAs.
It's EFAs, yep.
And these SCFAs, they act like messengers, right? They go around influencing your immune system, even the community bacteria that's living on your skin itself.
Oh, wow.
So think of it like this. Your gut bacteria, they're sending out signals that can actually change how the bacteria on your skin are behaving.
Wow, that is like a crazy level of coordination happening there.
It is.
Are there like any specific examples of how this whole gut skin crosstalk actually works?
Oh, absolutely. There was this really compelling study done in mice,
Hmm.
and they used Lactobacillus reuteri, which is,
Mm.
a common probiotic.
Okay.
And the mice that received this specific bacteria, they actually saw a reversal of age-related skin thinning.
What?
Isn't that cool? They also had increased growth of new hair follicles, and the result was thicker, shinier fur.
That's amazing. Talk about a beauty boost from the inside out. So what's like the magic behind these SCFAs? How do they actually benefit our skin?
Well, SCFAs are really good at calming inflammation in the skin.
Okay.
And they do this by reducing the production of inflammatory molecules called cytokines. These are like the body's alarm signals.
Right.
SCFAs also reduce the activity of something called histone deacetylase.
Histone.
So
Okay.
think of histone deacetylase like a switch.
Mm-hmm.
It can turn certain genes off, right?
Yeah, I got it.
So by reducing its activity, the SCFAs allow beneficial genes that are related to skin repair and protection to be more active. And this is actually an example of epigenetics, right? Like how your gut bacteria can actually influence how your genes are expressed.
Wow. So like a well-nourished gut can actually lead to healthier skin on a genetic level,
Yeah.
potentially even slowing down those visible signs of aging.
Exactly. And this link, it becomes even clearer when you look at specific skin conditions.
Right.
Like, for example, people with psoriasis, they often have lower diversity in their gut bacteria, particularly fewer of a type called Coprococcus.
Coprococcus, okay.
Yeah.
What do those little guys do?
Well, what's interesting about Coprococcus is that they're associated with the development of regulatory T lymphocytes. These are the peacekeepers of your immune system.
Oh, okay.
They help regulate immune responses and prevent your body from attacking its own tissues. So it seems like a balanced gut. It supports these peacekeepers, which can be really helpful for conditions like psoriasis.
That makes sense, yeah. What about acne? Because I feel like so many people struggle with that.
Yeah, with acne, the gut microbial landscape is often quite different. Studies have shown that people with acne, they often have more proteobacteria and fewer actinobacteria in their gut. And actinobacteria, this includes like the beneficial types you find in probiotics, like bifidobacteria and lactobacilli.
Right, right.
So overall, there's often a less diverse gut flora, and there's more of the not-so-desirable bacteria like E. coli.
More of the like bad guys and fewer of the good guys, right?
Exactly.
Okay. And I know our source material also mentioned something about like probiotics and sun protection.
Right, right. So that's another fascinating area. Certain probiotics, particularly those containing bifidobacterium and lactobacilli, they've shown this thing called a photoprotective effect,
The photoprotected. Okay.
which means they can actually help reduce the damage caused by UV radiation from the sun and potentially even slow down sun-induced skin aging. But it's important to remember, this is not a replacement for sunscreen.
No, no, no. Probiotics won't let us skip the SPF for sure. But the main message here is pretty clear, right? Like taking care of your gut, nurturing that healthy gut microbiota, it can significantly contribute to healthier skin and a more like, I don't know, a more youthful appearance overall.
Right.
Okay, so we've talked about the outer layer, our skin, right? What about something deeper, like our bones? I mean, like that connection just feels less obvious, doesn't it?
It might seem that way, but your gut microbiota, it plays a surprisingly important role in bone health.
Okay.
And there are a couple of key mechanisms at play here. First, it influences how well you absorb all those crucial nutrients you need for good bone density.
Okay.
And second, it can actually produce substances that directly affect both bone growth and breakdown.
Really? Okay, so how do these tiny little gut inhabitants influence something as solid as our bones? Like, how does that even work?
The simplified explanation is this. When your gut bacteria munch on soluble fiber, which is like their favorite food source, they produce those SCFAs again:
SCFC, okay.
acetate, propionate, and butyrate. And these three, they've been shown to promote increased bone density.
Okay.
So eating your fiber, it not only keeps your gut bugs happy, it can also contribute to stronger bones.
So fiber in, SCFAs produce stronger bones. It's all connected. And you mentioned like epigenetics earlier in the context of skin. Does that play a role here too?
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
So SCFAs, particularly butyrate, they also have these epigenetic effects on bone health. They help reduce the production of osteoclasts.
Osteoclast.
Think of those as the cells that break down bone tissue.
Oh, okay. Got it.
So by keeping their activity in check, the SCFAs help maintain bone mass.
That's incredible. Like bacterial byproducts are influencing the very cells that like sculpt our skeleton.
Yep.
Are there any interesting studies on this?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There was this really compelling mouse study where they supplemented with butyrate directly. They didn't even change the gut microbiota composition.
Oh.
But just giving the butyrate led to a significant increase in bone density.
Mm.
And, as we saw with the skin, the gut microbiota, it also interacts with the immune system, including those regulatory T cells, which, they play a role in preventing excessive bone loss as well.
It seems like those T regulatory cells are like key players throughout the whole body.
Oh, they really are. And here's another really interesting detail. In animal studies, butyrate supplementation actually sped up the rate at which minerals were deposited into bones, which is the process of forming that new bone crystal.
Wow.
And this happened within just a couple of weeks.
Oh, wow. That's pretty rapid, right?
It is.
So I'm guessing we can't just like take a butyrate supplement and expect to have like rock solid bones, can we?
Probably not, no. While those findings are super encouraging, it's important to remember that in humans, especially for those with conditions like osteopenia or osteoporosis, the most crucial stimulus for bone development, it's a weight-bearing exercise.
Right.
You also need, enough intake of essential minerals like calcium, along with vitamin K2 and vitamin D3, all those good things for optimal bone health.
So gut health is an important piece of the puzzle, but it's not the whole picture. What happens when like the gut microbiota isn't so healthy, especially in relation to our bones?
Yeah, research has definitely linked imbalances in the gut microbiota with conditions like osteoarthritis and osteoporosis.
Yeah.
And some less conventional studies, they've actually shown that antibiotic treatments, which can really disrupt your gut flora, can have negative effects on bone density and even the structural integrity of bone.
See, that's not something you'd automatically think of, like antibiotics impacting bone strength.
I know, right? It's pretty amazing. And here's another pathway. So a healthy gut flora, it actually helps promote the production of insulin-like growth factor 1, or IGF-1.
Okay.
And this hormone is not only crucial for bone growth, it's also important for the production of collagen, which, as we discussed, is important for skin health, too.
Right.
So when beneficial gut bacteria are reduced, IGF-1 levels can drop. But the good news is that in those animal studies where antibiotics did negatively impact the gut, butyrate supplementation was actually able to reverse this and restore those normal IGF-1 levels.
So butyrate's like a little bit of an unsung hero in this whole like gut-body communication network,
Huh.
isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
Any other like bone-related benefits we should know about?
Well, there's emerging evidence suggesting a potential protective effect for postmenopausal women, where probiotics that produce a lot of butyrate have shown some promise in slowing down bone density loss.
Interesting.
And there are even other, more complex mechanisms being investigated involving things like polyamines, hydrogen sulfide, parathyroid hormone, even the influence of microbiota on estrogen metabolism.
Yeah.
All of these can indirectly affect bone health, though we won't go into those details today.
Right. So the key takeaway is that having a healthy gut microbiota can contribute to better bone density and help us, maintain a strong skeleton as we age.
Sure.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. Go from bone to something that feels, I guess, more directly linked to our internal environment,
Okay.
body fat. How does our gut influence, like, fat accumulation?
Yeah, that's a connection that's become increasingly well established, and is partly due to some landmark studies in mice.
Right.
You might have heard about those experiments where they did fecal transplants from obese mice to germ-free mice.
Right, yeah.
And the remarkable outcome was that the recipient mice, they started gaining weight and developing obesity, even without changing their diet.
Wow. That is some powerful evidence right there. What's the general picture when it comes to humans?
Well, in humans, what we generally see is that individuals who tend to be leaner often have a greater abundance of bacteria in their gut that are really efficient at fermenting soluble fiber into those beneficial SCFAs we keep mentioning.
Ah, so it comes back to SCFAs again?
It does, it does.
How do they specifically, like, play a role in regulating body fat?
Okay, so for example, butyrate. Butyrate enables those fiber-fermenting bacteria to thrive,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
And in mouse models, this process helped the mice burn more fat for energy. It led to improvements in their overall body fat percentage and energy levels. Essentially, they were like counteracting insulin resistance,
Okay.
which is where your body struggles to effectively use fat as fuel.
Got it. So a thriving community of, like, beneficial gut bacteria can actually help us burn fat more efficiently.
That seems to be the case, yeah.
Yeah.
The current understanding is that even with the same calorie intake, a less diverse or a less healthy gut flora, it might not be as efficient at processing those nutrients, and that could potentially lead to increased fat storage.
Okay.
There's also the theory that in individuals with obesity and insulin resistance, there might be an imbalance in the gut microbiota that affects how amino acids like branched-chain amino acids, those BCAAs that some people supplement with for muscle growth, are metabolized.
Right.
So either they aren't broken down properly, or their production is increased because of undigested protein, and that can negatively impact the intestinal lining and overstimulate a pathway called mTOR.
MTR, okay.
And mTOR has been linked to both a shorter lifespan and increased fat storage.
So it's almost like a double negative then, less efficient nutrient processing and potentially even triggering pathways that promote fat storage.
Exactly. But the encouraging news is that this whole gut microbial landscape, it can be modified through your diet and lifestyle.
Okay, good.
And preclinical studies have highlighted a particular bacterium called Akkermansia mucinifera as playing this central role in gut health. It's shown promise in improving body fat percentage, overall weight management, reducing inflammation in the gut, and helping to improve insulin sensitivity and the integrity of the intestinal barrier. And what's really interesting is that it's actually becoming available as a probiotic supplement now.
Akkermansia mucinifera, that's a name, definitely one to watch out for. Okay. So we've gone from fat, let's move to something that might seem completely unrelated, our muscles. How in the world do those microbes in our gut influence how well our muscles function?
Yeah, it might seem surprising, but there are these really fascinating connections between your gut bacteria and how well your muscles perform.
Hmm.
And, we've already talked about one key player, butyrate, but there's another important one to consider, bile acids.
Bile acids, yeah. I always thought those were mostly involved in digestion, right?
They are, but it turns out that secondary bile acids, which are actually produced by your gut bacteria from primary bile acids made in your liver, can activate a receptor called the farnesoid X receptor.
Okay.
And while the name might be a bit of a mouthful, this receptor is crucial for regulating cellular energy levels and how that energy is stored within your body.
Okay. So bile acids have like a broader role than just breaking down fats. What about butyrate's impact specifically on muscle function?
Well, as we've seen, SCFAs, like butyrate, they can actually influence the amount of protein that gets incorporated into your muscles.
Mm.
So under similar conditions, meaning the same amount of exercise, the same protein intake, a healthier gut environment with higher butyrate production might lead to greater muscle development. And that's because of both the increased energy availability and potentially even enhanced protein synthesis.
So gut bacteria can directly influence muscle growth. That's pretty amazing. Are there any like real world examples of this in athletes?
Oh, absolutely. There was this fascinating study done at Harvard where they looked at a group of Boston Marathon runners.
Okay.
And they found that these endurance athletes, they had a significantly higher abundance of a specific genus of bacteria called Veillonella in their gut.
Vanilla. Okay. Sounds like a specialized team for runners.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So the researchers then took fecal samples from these runners, isolated the Veillonella bacteria, and they administered them to untrained mice.
Okay.
And here's where it gets really exciting. These mice, they'd never undergone any training, but they showed a remarkable 13% improvement in their running performance compared to the control group of mice that didn't receive Veillonella.
Wow. So their aerobic capacity improved just by altering their gut bacteria?
It seems that way, yeah. It's incredible.
That's unbelievable. So how does Vanilla actually achieve this, like, biological performance enhancement?
Well, the current hypothesis is that Veillonella bacteria, they consume lactate, which is that byproduct of intense exercise that can really contribute to muscle fatigue.
Right, yeah.
So by metabolizing some of this lactate, it prevents excessive buildup and effectively increases the lactate threshold,
Okay.
allowing people to exercise at higher intensities for longer periods before they hit that wall of fatigue.
Wow.
And this actually connects to the concept of training at a specific cardiovascular intensity.
Mhm.
It's often referred to as zone 4, which typically falls around 80–90% of your maximum heart rate.
Okay. So these bacteria are like these tiny little performance enhancing agents that are working by like managing this key fatigue marker. What about other types of physical activity though, like beyond endurance running?
Yeah, good question. So while those findings with Veillonella in runners were, really dramatic, there have been less pronounced but still consistent observations in cyclists and even bodybuilders. And they show common patterns of gut flora that seem to be adapted to their specific types of physical exertion.
Right.
So it really highlights how our gut microbiome can be both influenced by and potentially influence our physical capabilities.
It's like our gut adapts to support our lifestyle in a way.
Yeah.
What about the negative side of things? Can a less healthy gut microbiota actually hinder our muscles?
Yes, a less optimal microbiota, it's thought to contribute to that general process of accelerated aging.
Okay.
And that includes aspects related to muscle health.
Right.
And we know that there's a correlation between sarcopenia, which is that age-related loss of muscle mass and strength, and dysbiosis,
Dysbiosis, yep.
which is an imbalance in the gut microbiota. And this is particularly true in older adults, but also in younger individuals who might be underweight or who live more sedentary lifestyles.
So while popping a probiotic isn't going to make us like suddenly ripped, do they have any role to play in muscle health at all?
While probiotics won't reverse significant muscle loss, exercise and proper nutrition, those are still the cornerstones of muscle health. Some studies have actually indicated modest improvements in muscle strength and resistance to fatigue in older adults who take probiotic supplements.
Okay.
So it seems to play more of a supportive role rather than being a primary driver of muscle growth.
Got it. And it sounds like the whole relationship between exercise and our gut, it's a two-way street, right?
Absolutely. Exercise, generally, it has a positive impact on your gut flora, promoting a more diverse and beneficial microbial community. However, excessive or very intense exercise, especially without adequate recovery, it might actually lead to increased oxidative stress, increased permeability of the intestinal lining, and potentially a less healthy gut flora. So it's
Okay.
all about finding a balance.
Yeah, as with everything. Right.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've explored the gut's intricate connections with our skin, our bones, fat, muscles. Now, let's move on to our respiratory system, our lungs. How does our gut influence their health and function?
Well, both our skin and our lungs, they have their own unique communities of microorganisms. These are super important for maintaining the health of these tissues.
Okay.
However, The community in our lungs is actually smaller, both in volume and diversity, compared to that, vast ecosystem that we have in our gut.
Right.
And this is why the gut microbiota has such a significant downstream impact, particularly on our overall immune system and our ability to defend against infections, including those that affect the lungs.
So our gut's like the central command center for our immune responses, and that has implications for our respiratory health.
Exactly. Gut bacteria and the various byproducts they produce, including our friend butyrate, they can actually cross the intestinal barrier. They enter the bloodstream, travel to distant parts of the body, including the lungs, where they can influence the local immune environment.
Wow. That's quite a journey for these tiny molecules. So how does this gut-lung axis, like how does it actually benefit our respiratory system?
Well, SCFAs, like butyrate, they've shown the ability to reduce inflammation and dampen those allergic responses in the airways.
Okay.
And this has significant implications for conditions like asthma, potentially lowering the risk of developing it in children. And, we've known about a connection between gut health and asthma for some time, but now we're gaining a much better understanding of the specific mechanisms involved.
And it sounds like, disrupting this delicate balance and like the early gut environment can have negative consequences for lung health later on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's an inverse relationship that researchers have observed. The use of antibiotics during pregnancy, which can significantly alter the developing child's microbiota,
Yeah.
that has actually been linked to an increased risk of the child developing asthma and respiratory allergies later in life.
That really underscores the importance of those early microbial colonizers, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The bacteria that first colonize an infant's gut, including some less commonly known types like segmented filamentous bacteria,
Yeah.
they play this crucial role in the maturation and education of the immune system.
Wow.
And the antibodies that are present in breast milk, they also contribute significantly to shaping this initial gut microbial community.
Right.
And disruptions during this really critical developmental window can lead to an increased susceptibility to various infections throughout life, including those that affect the respiratory system.
And what about people who experienced a lot of like colds and flus during childhood? Could that potentially be linked to their gut bacteria at all?
There's some evidence that suggests that experiencing those frequent respiratory infections in early life, which might indicate, a less robust immune response, could be linked to lower overall bacterial diversity in the gut.
Okay.
So it's a complex interplay, but it seems like establishing that diverse and balanced gut microbiota early in life is super important for developing a resilient immune system that can effectively protect the respiratory tract.
So it's not that a less than ideal gut means we have no immune defenses at all. It's that we might have a less efficient or a less targeted response, right?
Exactly. For instance, studies have shown that individuals with a less diverse gut flora might produce lower levels of immunoglobulin A, or IgA. This is a crucial antibody that lines our mucosal surfaces, including those in the lungs, and it helps to neutralize pathogens.
Right.
So their initial line of defense against those respiratory invaders might be a little bit weakened.
Okay, so just like with exercise, it seems like there's a bidirectional relationship between the gut and the lungs. Can lung issues actually affect the gut too?
They absolutely can. So the gut influences the lungs, and conversely, lung issues can impact the gut. Think about when you get the flu, right? It often comes with those digestive symptoms,
Yes.
nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. And this is a clear example of how a respiratory infection can actually disrupt that gut environment, and it can even lead to a temporary loss of beneficial gut bacteria like lactobacilli.
Yeah.
And that's often why, healthcare professionals will sometimes recommend probiotics after an infection to help replenish those beneficial microbes.
That makes sense. So it's all interconnected. A compromised gut can make our lungs more vulnerable, and a lung infection can throw our gut off balance. What about like more chronic lung conditions?
Yeah, well, the link is definitely evident there as well. For example, individuals who smoke and develop COPD,
Right.
they've often been found to have increased permeability of their intestinal lining.
Okay.
And as we touched on earlier, that higher risk of asthma in babies born via C-section or who received early antibiotic treatment.
Right.
That also points to a gut-lung axis connection in the very development of the disease.
And is this just a matter of like correlation, or have we seen evidence of a direct causal link between gut bacteria and lung health?
Yeah, that's a really critical distinction.
Yeah.
While many studies, they just show correlations. In the case of asthma, Animal studies have actually provided evidence suggesting a causal relationship.
Okay.
Researchers have shown that by introducing specific bacteria that are often absent or reduced in the gut microbiota of asthmatic animals, they can actually achieve a reduction in airway inflammation and bronchoconstriction. That's the tightening of the airways that makes breathing difficult.
Right, yeah.
So this suggests that restoring a more balanced gut microbiota could potentially have a direct therapeutic effect in certain respiratory conditions.
Wow.
And there are also examples in other conditions like cystic fibrosis, where changes in the gut microbiota have been linked to the progression of the disease.
That's pretty promising. Like the idea that we might actually be able to target the gut microbiota as a way to improve lung health.
Yeah, no, it's really exciting.
Okay, next on our list, the liver. It seems like the gut would have a pretty direct line of communication with the liver, just given their proximity, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The liver has this very unique and close relationship with the gut because it receives most of the venous blood directly from the intestines via the portal vein.
Okay.
So this means that pretty much everything that's absorbed from your gut, including bacteria and their byproducts, it passes through the liver first.
That makes sense. So what kind of impact does our gut microbiota have on this crucial organ?
Well, one of the main ways the gut microbiota influences the liver is through the metabolism of bile acids.
Okay.
And as we briefly mentioned earlier, your gut bacteria are actually responsible for transforming primary bile acids, which are produced by your liver to aid in fat digestion, into secondary bile acids.
Right.
So if you have a less diverse or imbalanced gut microbiota, this whole conversion process can get disrupted, and that can potentially increase your risk of developing conditions like non-alcoholic fatty liver disease.
Oh, okay. So a healthy gut contributes to proper bile acid processing, which then in turn is good for the liver. What other connections are there?
Well, butyrate makes another appearance here.
Of course.
It's been shown to play a role in potentially preventing the development of cancerous cells in the liver.
Hmm.
And while it's still early research, not a direct therapeutic application yet, there was a pilot study conducted in humans with severe alcohol-related hepatitis, where fecal microbiota transplantation actually led to a reduction in disease markers and an increase in survival rates.
Wow, that's pretty significant.
It really is. But for a more everyday example, consider this. A healthy gut microbiota helps produce those SCFAs,
Right.
acetate, butyrate, propionate,
Right.
which then travel to the liver via that portal vein. And propionate, in particular, is metabolized in the liver, and it's been shown to help lower both cholesterol and blood glucose levels.
Oh, wow. So two people could have the exact same diet and even the same genetic makeup. But they could have completely different liver health outcomes based solely on the composition of their gut microbiota.
Exactly. For instance, identical twins, they have the same dietary intake.
Right.
They could have different cholesterol and glucose levels depending on the makeup of their gut microbiome.
Wow.
And that, in turn, can influence their risk of developing cardiovascular disease and certain types of tumors.
That really highlights the profound and often underestimated influence of these tiny organisms living within us, doesn't it? Okay, let's move on to another vital filtering organ, our kidneys. How does our gut affect kidney function?
Yeah, maintaining healthy kidney function is absolutely essential for overall health and longevity and preventing a whole range of diseases.
Right.
And unfortunately, kidney function, it naturally tends to decline as we age.
Yeah.
But what we're increasingly understanding is that a less healthy or imbalanced gut microbiota can actually contribute to this decline. And that's because it can promote the production of substances that can actually worsen kidney function and reduce their ability to filter waste products from the blood effectively.
So an unhappy gut can contribute to unhappier kidneys. How does that connection actually work at a biological level?
Well, it often involves the formation of certain types of toxins.
Okay.
When proteins and fats aren't fully digested in the upper parts of your digestive tract, which happens more often than we might realize, they reach the colon.
Okay.
And there, the resident gut bacteria, they can then metabolize them. And ideally, this process relies on the presence of carbohydrates as an energy source for the bacteria.
Right. So I think I see where this is heading. What happens when carbohydrate intake is low or when digestion isn't optimal?
Yeah, so if there aren't enough readily available carbohydrates in the colon, certain types of bacteria, like Clostridium species, they can ferment these undigested proteins. And this leads to the production of toxic compounds like phenols and those branched-chain amino acids, the BCAAs we talked about earlier in the context of muscle.
Right. Yeah.
These substances they can be really harmful to the lining of the intestines.
Right.
And if the intestinal barrier becomes more permeable, often referred to as leaky gut, these toxins can then enter the bloodstream and eventually reach the kidneys.
Okay.
And there, they can contribute to kidney damage and reduced function.
So that, like, seemingly healthy, high protein, low carbohydrate approach might actually have some hidden downsides for our kidney health.
Yeah, it's definitely something to be mindful of.
Yeah.
And a similar issue can actually arise with the metabolism of fats in the absence of sufficient carbohydrates in the colon. So bacteria can break down beneficial substances found in fats, like choline and lecithin, which are really important for fat metabolism, into a compound called TMAO,
Okay.
or trimethylamine oxide. Now, while TMA itself isn't directly toxic, elevated levels of TMAO are actually a strong indicator of dysbiosis.
Yeah.
That's an unhealthy imbalance in the gut microbiota. And they're associated with increased inflammation and poorer cardiovascular health.
Okay, so TMAO keeps coming up in our discussion. So it's not just a concern for the heart, but also a burden on the kidneys.
You got it. So TMAO needs to be filtered and eliminated by the kidneys.
Right.